Revelation 2511. From the 14th of October 1942. Receptivity. The readiness to receive is only then in accordance with God's will when body and soul completely abandon themselves to the Spirit. Thus when the body remains completely unnoticed by the soul, or the body also wants the same as the soul, only to hear the voice of the Spirit within itself. The less the body hinders the soul, the clearer the soul hears what the Spirit wants to convey to it. Then the soul tries to come to an agreement with the Spirit. This bond is incomparably valuable. To a certain extent the soul is free, it is no longer bound by its body but closer to its actual purpose. It lives in the spiritual kingdom although it still dwells on earth. And the body is completely inactive during this time until the soul revives it again. As soon as the human being can establish this degree of receptivity, it will be easy for him to receive spiritual messages and also to take a look into the kingdom which is the Spirit's home. And in order to reach this degree it only requires heartfelt prayer to God and complete devotion to Him, provided that the recipient's life is an unselfish labor of love. Then the human being will experience a change in himself. He will feel removed from earth, he will be seized by God, and the body will give up all resistance. It will bow down to the will of the soul which strives towards the Spirit and thus no longer signifies an obstacle for it. Often this connection can only be established with the greatest overcoming of oneself. The soul does not yet completely push towards the Spirit within itself, it still allows itself to be influenced by the body. That is, it still pays too much attention to its desire. It is not yet as ready to receive the Spirit's messages as it needs to be in order to accept them effortlessly. And then the soul has to struggle for strength and perseverance. It has to fight against its body, it also has to switch off intellectual thinking and only allow itself to be directed by the voice of the heart. It has to be able to forget the world in order to find itself again in the spiritual kingdom. And it must often practice this flight upwards in order to be able to free itself from its physical shell at any time, in order to be able to hear the voice within itself at any time, in order to receive precious messages from the spiritual kingdom. If the soul is unable to hear the voice of the Spirit within itself, then its preparation is either not in accordance with divine will, that is, the soul cannot completely separate itself from earth and that which is earthly, or the Spirit cannot express itself to it because its ability to hear is not yet developed. And the latter is the case if the soul has not yet changed to love. Then it will remain silent within it if it listens, for the voice of the Spirit sounds so finely that any discordant tone which sounds in a still immature soul drowns out this voice. The soul must have shattered the shell around itself, which is achieved by a God-pleasing way of life. Then it can hear the finest sound within itself and consequently also convey it to the intellect, thus reproduce it as a human being. Divine wisdom is hidden in every human being, that is, the divine spiritual spark slumbers in every human being, which, because it is a part of the eternal deity, can also penetrate divine wisdom and impart it to the human being. But whether the soul makes itself receptive for what the Spirit wants to impart to it depends on the human being's will, whether he shapes himself through loving activity. The human being must therefore want to listen and be able to listen. He must declare himself willing to receive the messages from above, but he must also be deemed worthy by God to be given spiritual messages. Thus every human being can certainly strive for divine working of the Spirit, that is, desire it, but at the same time he must fulfill the conditions which are set for the working of the Spirit. The working of God's Spirit is certainly a gift of grace, yet it does not come to the human being without his worthiness and will turned towards God. As soon as the working of the Spirit of God begins to diminish, this is merely due to the human being slackening in his spiritual striving or being too closely connected to the world. which hinders his flight of fancy. It is in the divine will that the human being constantly struggles so that he does not become slack in his striving for him. And therefore obstacles will often make the path impassable for him, and then he must try to overcome these obstacles with increased effort. He must, if he lacks the strength to do so, pray for strength. He must unite with God more intimately and more often in thought. He must present his adversity to him and look forward to his help with faithful confidence. God demands a strong faith, a faith that never wavers, even though temptations approach it. Confidence in God's help should be so strong that nothing is able to make a person look to the future with worry and fear. God's love and God's omnipotence should always be before the eyes of the person whose faith begins to waver. And a person of such profound faith will also be suitable to receive God's spiritual gifts. He will despise the world and live a life in closest union with God, and his spirit will make itself known to the soul wherever and whenever it desires it. Amen.